it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question of last week's case study was part 3 of my 77-year-old dad has been in intensive care ventilated for a week and he's not waking up. The doctors have made him NFR without my consent and they want to switch off the ventilator. Help! And that was part 3 of a 3-part series. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. This was another great case study where you can see how I can help a very concerned and very distressed client how to quickly make sense in a situation where the intensive care team hasn't been open and transparent with her and her family. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our clients, which is an excerpt from an email counselling and consulting session with me. And the question this week is, my 32-year-old son has an anoxic brain injury with a tracheostomy and I want him to wake up. Now they are giving him more sedatives. Help. So, our client writes, Hi Patrick, my 32-year-old son was suffocated and lost oxygen resulting in an anoxic brain injury. He was in the coma from Thursday the 7th of this month. The doctor said no hope of recovery since day 1 and that he would remain in a vegetative state. On the 15th, they did the tracheostomy and since then I saw some improvements because he started to move his legs, his arms and his head and at times opening his eyes, but he has not been trying to talk yet. He's still intermittently ventilated overnight, but he's off the ventilator during the day. This morning I went to visit and the nurse told me that they gave him sedatives to control his movements because he almost fell off the bed. His oxygen levels this morning were about 58, about 85%. Normally it's around 95 to 100%. My question is if the sedatives are going to interfere with my son's attempt to wake up or recovery. Please let me know anything you can as soon as possible. Thank you so much, from Ivanka. So here is my response. Hi Ivanka. Thank you for being a client and thank you for using my email counseling and consulting service. You see, Ivanka, it looks like your son has fallen prey to the intensive care team's negativity. Most families who come to us at IntensiveCareHotline.com have the number one complaint that intensive care teams or the doctors are negative. This negativity is probably even worse when it comes to head and brain injuries. Why? Because unlike any other organ, the brain can't be controlled. Any other organ, whether the lungs, the heart, the kidneys or the liver, can be temporarily controlled and function replaced by mechanical ventilation, ECMO, kidney dialysis, etc. The brain function, as you would have seen by now, cannot be controlled and not be replaced, even though I believe this might be a possibility in the future. The biggest problem with head and brain injuries is simply that it probably has the most uncertain outcomes out of all admissions into intensive care for the reasons that I just mentioned. Therefore, unless you and the doctors will give your son time, you simply don't know the outcome. My experience has shown me that the best outcomes in head and brain injuries come over time. This time is often not granted by intensive care teams and by the doctors because of what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. The reality is that you are looking for a solution for your son and the intensive care team is looking for a solution for their intensive care unit. It's that simple. What's a solution for you? Well, obviously to get the best possible care and treatment for your son, and most of all, you will need time and positivity and nurturing to recover. This will take time, resources, effort, nurturing, and a lot of patience. Therefore, time is the best healer. I have seen some patients with severe head and brain injuries, including anoxic brain injuries, being in intensive care for many weeks and sometimes many months. And the more resources, time, patience, efforts, and nurturing you give to these patients, the better the outcomes. Some of those patients stayed in intensive care for up to 6 months, and they left ICU alive and went on to rehabilitation. Why did they stay in ICU for up to 6 months? Because they had lots of issues, such as ongoing high brain pressures that needed to be managed, and they also needed hemodialysis for kidney failure and had other complications. The reality is that so much is dependent on the culture in an intensive care unit, and unfortunately most intensive care units are negative and want to pull the plug as early as possible. It's sad, but true. Some of those patients I have seen have been in an induced coma for many weeks and yet they recovered. To answer your original question, they shouldn't have resedated your son just because he was starting to move his legs and arms. Those are actually good signs. Those are actually good signs and it's showing progress. I would almost argue that with the intensive care team being so negative that they almost want to suppress any positive signs in order to make management of your son easier for them. For example, if they do keep giving him sedatives, even though your son is showing signs of movement and improvement, it also makes it more likely for your son needing the overnight ventilation. The goal for your son should be to be more awake, getting out of bed and stimulate him so that you and the intensive care team can get an idea what his level of functioning is going to be. You are not going to get that by sedating him. It's also concerning to me that your son's oxygen levels have dropped. Again, side effects of getting sedatives is respiratory depression, and therefore he may have shown minimal breathing efforts due to the sedatives. Again, as next steps, your son needs to be off sedatives. He needs to be stimulated. He needs to have physical therapy. He needs time, nurturing, and a positive environment. Then he can hopefully get off the ventilator and maybe even have the tracheostomy removed eventually. Your goal for now should be to get your son out of intensive care and off the ventilator and then on to neurorehabilitation. We also have created a resource for head and brain injuries where I put a link below this video. There's a great ebook, The 10 Things You Didn't Know About Severe Head or Brain Injuries, including traumatic brain injury and stroke in intensive care that you must know, especially if your critically ill loved one isn't waking up or if the intensive care team is suggesting a poor prognosis. So I put a link to this ebook below this video. Overall, it sounds to me like you are a great advocate for your son, Ivanka. And it sounds like you are not giving up anytime soon. But you also need to know and understand what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care. And you need to know and understand why the intensive care team is negative, why they are doing the things they are doing, and why they are saying the things they are saying. Again, Ivanka, you are looking for a solution for your son. And the intensive care team is looking for a solution for their intensive care unit. Their worst possible scenario from an intensive care perspective is that your son will be occupying an intensive care bed for many weeks or even months to come. Therefore, they keep giving you the negative doom and gloom speech so that they can have their way eventually. And if you are like 99% of the families of critically ill patients in intensive care, you will give up and you will give into the perceived power and the perceived authority of the intensive care team. The fact of the matter is that if you do that, you and your son will be another casualty of the intensive care team. Therefore, you need to go against the grain and you need to speak up and keep fighting for your son. What's the solution the intensive care team is looking for? Well, again, their worst possible scenario is that your son will be occupying an intensive care bed for the next few weeks or even months. Intensive care beds are scarce, expensive, and in-demand resources. Therefore, somebody else is already knocking at your son's ICU bed. That might be a more profitable and more interesting case for the intensive care unit. For example, all intensive care units do medical research, and it's a revenue driver for them. If your son is not enrolled into a medical research study, the intensive care team may not have an interest in giving your son the best possible treatment and care. They may actually prefer looking after 70-year-old Mr. Smith after open heart surgery because he's been enrolled into a medical research study. That's why it's so important to know and understand that intensive care is often not what you see is what you get. The best way to know and understand what's happening in intensive care behind the scenes and then use that insider knowledge to start managing the intensive care team is in another ebook, The 10 Things You Didn't Know Happening Behind the Scenes in Intensive Care That Hold You Back from Making Informed Decisions, Have Peace of Mind, Control, Power, and Influence. This ebook will give you a deep understanding of how intensive care units operate behind the scenes and how they position your son's diagnosis, prognosis, care, and treatment. Your job as your son's advocate is to position your son's diagnosis, prognosis, as well as his care and his treatment in a positive light, because if you don't, the intensive care team will do it for you with an outcome that you won't like. You need to stay in control of your son's fate and destiny. Again, I can help you in positioning your son's diagnosis, prognosis, as well as his care and treatment here with my one-on-one counseling and consulting so that you can get the outcomes for your son that you want, need, and deserve. Last but not least, please make sure that you also have a look at intensivecareathome.com. Intensive Care at Home is a home care service providing tracheostomy and ventilator care at home as a genuine alternative to a long-term stay in intensive care. Go and check out intensivecareathome.com. I hope this helps, Ivanka, and I'll talk to you in a few days. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? Make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision-making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability, even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions, or you can call me. Find international phone numbers on our contacts tab. Also, check out our ebook section where you get more ebooks, videos, and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one counseling and consulting with me via Skype, over the phone, or via email by clicking on the products tab. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.